Dauntless is a multiplayer action game where you and up to 5 other friends, varying across different game modes, go out and fight giant monsters. This game advertised itself coming out as being truly cross-play, putting it on every platform and allowing all players from these platforms to play together, including PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and even the Nintendo Switch. Early on in the development, the game's developers sort of sold out to Epic, who then funded all the porting to different platforms and integrated the Epic Games service into every version of it on PC and on the consoles as well. However, it didn't hit the full goal because when this was coming out, they were talking about even putting it on mobile, but it never quite made it to mobile. Maybe for the better. The day before recording this first impressions here, I got to have my first impressions playing the game for about 10 hours on stream before my internet died. That was fun. And I've gotten, I feel, a decent enough feeling of the game to let you know how those first impressions went, and I've gotten to see a lot of what there is. So let's start with the introduction. You're booting up the game, you get into it, and the game throws you into a character creator after a short tutorial. The character creator is not the best first impression. You're first prompted with some head presets that mean absolutely nothing because you still need to make the gender choice, which is on the next tab, which is actually disguised as a body type choice. You know how in like every other game that is a character creator, body types would indicate how tall you are, how fat or muscular you are by default. These are what body types typically are. Well, that one button, which has its own dedicated tab on the character creation after you pick a preset, by the way, is what determines if you're actually playing a guy or a girl. And then for dialogues, for some reason, there's an extension to this that's hidden in your game settings in the options. So you have to find this hidden body type thing to find the actual gender select, but it's only visual. And then the actual gender select is in the options. And then you can play as like this big hairy dude and force everyone to call you a chick, which is a little weird. Reminds me of some Elder Scrolls lore where the writers were on very heavy drugs. That kind of feels like the situation I'm stumbling into when this is my first impressions, but whatever. We move onwards to the customization options and find they're very limited and very gender stereotypical. I find in most character creators, I can take a guy and make him look not like G.I. Joe. And I find that I can take a girl and make them look, I don't know, at least a little unique, like all kinds of things. Usually women are very customizable in games, but not in this game. In this game, no matter how you edit your character, you're gonna look sort of gender stereotypical, and there's not a whole lot of customization that will not make you look like a freak abomination that fucked up your character creation. Moving on to the performance of the game, once you're, playing the game, the tutorial, after the tutorial, it's mostly good. It'll feel very good in the tutorial because it scales very well, even with newer hardware. On high settings, put that on an SSD, it's gonna run so smoothly. I was getting 200 FPS out in the field. It goes down when you go into places like the hub. There's a hub where you have to go to get quests and craft stuff and track things. I did occasionally have some drops in frame rates, some stutters, some dips when models of enemies were spawning in, or assets, or especially around other players for some reason. I'm not quite sure why, because I'm running a 7800X3D, 7800XT plugged into Ethernet with gigabit internet. It shouldn't be on my end, games on an SSD, but there you have it. There's some weird stutters and frame drops that I don't really understand, but they're rare. They're rare, and I think you kind of need an eye to notice them. I don't think most players will care or notice, but for those that are a little more tech savvy, you may notice this. There's no crashing, only some occasional sync issues with social elements of the game. So happily, it's a very stable game. I had no disconnect problems with the online aspects of the game, which is a big concern of mine, having played the PC release of Monster Hunter World. The graphics that this performance is running off of look awesome. Honestly, there's some heavy LOD. because of course there is. The game has to run on a Nintendo Switch, and the maps are all small, but the stylized graphics this game shows off, they look great, they're easy to run, and they should hold up for years. I mean, they've already held up for years, right? And they still look awesome to me. The audio effects in combat are also pretty good. The game uses audio to simulate disorientation. Kind of like how if a flashbang goes off next to you in a shooter and you hear that ringing, well, this has a kind of deafening effect that happens when you get knocked over by a giant monster, for example. And in most games, I find these effects very annoying. But this is the one time I've played a game where I would say I think they actually did it correctly. However, this is up to personal preference. One of my viewers that played with me said he hated these effects so much. But these are my first impressions, and I found it to be quite nice, actually. Now, when you're getting past these initial impressions of the production quality of the game, where I feel like you can feel the lack of budget the game has with the occasional jankiness and the limitation of character creation and whatnot, you'll get into the player onboarding, the new player experience. And it's really not the greatest. I think this is another place where maybe the budget shines. I don't really know what, but there's a couple of introductory quests, as you'd expect maybe from any MMO-like, social RPG-ish sort of game, right? But they aren't representative of what comes next. The game initiates you by making it seem like a normal MMO, as it uses these quests to give you objectives with dialogue that slowly introduces you to the social elements and the mechanics of the game. But once you're out of the tutorial, the main story kind of just ends, like out of nowhere. There's still main story quests, but they don't feel main at all. Some of them feel tacked on later with additional NPCs for different weapons in the game, whereas like other NPCs have most of the weapons. There's 2 NPCs that only have 1 weapon each. They just have these random quest lines that are marked as main quest lines. I mean, there's virtually no side quests in any area you go to until one area where you have to fight these giant owls that has such a long side quest line out of nowhere that is so grindy and poorly designed, but especially so extensive that this one side quest line dwarfs every main quest that led up to this point. And you might run into this part maybe like, 5 hours into the game, 6 hours maybe. When it comes to the way stories communicated, by the way, it's weird, man. I am the kind of player that will read every line of quest text in every RPG, MMO, you name it, that I play. Doesn't matter, I will read it. This is one of the only games I've played in my entire life where I just don't want to read the quest text. It's mostly just a bunch of lore nonsense that never gets explained to you by NPCs that are not voice acted, and then text recaps of what those NPCs want you to do without all the lore bungling included. And then you could just look at the objective after, and the objective itself communicates what you need to do and your motivations for doing it way better than the NPCs ever do. And I've been reading everything to make sure of that, and that's just strangely how it is. And this weird lack of communication or inefficient communication also kind of extends to the tutorial of the game. Most mechanics in the game are just simply not explained in my experience so far. By the time they're introduced to you, at least, there are occasionally these extremely late explanations for systems. Like, I'll unlock a system, I'll start using it. When I unlock it, via my level, I unlock systems and mechanics via my level. But then the game doesn't explain it until I get to a certain island, and then I realize that I just haven't been using this entire gear slot this entire time that could be dealing fuck tons of damage or protecting me very well or something, completely changing the meta of how I play the game. And the game scales very heavily on this by introducing new system on top of new system on top of new system on top of mechanic on top of mechanic on top of mechanic. Your stats aren't rising as much. They do rise, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But it's this introduction of additional systems that allow for player skill and maybe memorization on top of the gameplay you learn at the beginning, which we'll talk about more in a little bit, that really controls how you scale. And the way the game introduces you to all this stuff is very piss poor. And I know this is maybe mostly negative so far. We have some really positive points coming up, but I have to go over one more negative thing in the new player experience that really, it really, you are very rapidly inundated with umpteen different things the game wants you to spend money on. In the first day of playing, I was given half a dozen different quests or more. I don't even remember there were so many. To introduce me to all the different things I can buy. From a battle pass to, oh wait, 2 more battle passes at one time, to a subscription for percent increases to XP and loot gain, to a cash shop filled with many different bundles, some of which are cosmetic entirely, some of which are quote unquote convenience, and some of which are just flat out pay to win. One of the things the game has a whole quest line to introduce you to is the fact that the game has keys and chests, and more than just these chests, even a game mode where you need these keys, and if you open these chests, which takes a couple of seconds, it will reward you more main progression things in the same time span, especially if you do the game mode dedicated to these keys, by the way, than you would earn by just, you know, fighting the monsters. It's the main point of the game, right? To fight the monsters. I haven't played a lot of games like this, mostly just God Eater, but I'm pretty sure the main point is to fight the monsters. But if you want the best rewards, just spend real money on keys and run around opening chests or doing a gliding mini game, which gives more than the chests. It's very weird. Now, to the actual positive stuff. I should have put this earlier because I probably chased off a bunch of viewers already, but whatever. The actual combat of the game, like the main thing this game was designed around before needing to make money got involved, is incredible. It's very smooth, it's very fluid, dodging is so responsive, every weapon you can pick from feels notably different and has big advantages. However, they are all pretty close range in nature. The game does reward you for fighting as close as possible, even if you use ranged weapons. So you kind of have to fight close up. The monsters, they are very exciting to fight, especially as you go from island to island, fighting stronger variants of them and new monsters that put the old monsters to shame. The gameplay is just the best part of the game, especially with friends. It could get repetitive solo, as the game's entire progression involves killing the monsters endlessly, you know, with no compelling characters or storyline in sight, but with friends. You know, if you can bring some friends into this game, this is just one of those really, really impressive gameplay systems, one of these really amazing combat systems that's a lot of fun. It's, in my opinion, way better than God Eater was, and that's where most of my experience in this genre is. There are some attacks that are not very well telegraphed. There isn't any way that I've seen to actually block or parry. You just dodge. You attack and you dodge. That's it. Real simple. And all attacks are ground-based, at least with the weapons I've tried. I've tried about 3 or 4 different weapons. I haven't really seen any aerial attacks. Like, you don't jump up and get access to a whole different set of combos, for example. So this is where I think also the budget of the game probably shows. It's definitely more limited compared to something maybe like God Eater or maybe like Monster Hunter, but it's a lot of fun. What's here is fun. If you go in with the right expectations, the combat is so fun, and that's what's going to keep me playing after today. Moving along, let's talk about the progression of the game a little more, and this is where it's going to get kind of negative again, right? So this game is a grind. It's just flat out a grind. If you like the grind aspect of RuneScape and you like this combat, then you might love this game. However, it's weird, man. Rewards for things are very minimal. Everything you do gives basically the exact same rewards, except for those chests with the keys, which give like 10 times that. And then the mini game I mentioned gives even more. But you're getting rewards for everything. Talk to NPC. Hey, I want you to do this thing. Here's a reward. Okay? Go talk to other NPC. Hey, thanks for coming to do the thing. Here's a reward. Okay? Go do the thing. Here's a reward. Thanks. Now go talk to this other guy. Here's another reward. Didn't you just give me a reward? Yeah, here's another reward. Is how it works. I feel like I'm constantly being bombarded, like mobile game style rewards for everything, but they're all so small that despite the flair the game gives it, it's more annoying. It's obnoxious. It's not something I want because it's so minimal anyway. I'd rather just find the damn chests, because then there's only one pop-up I have to worry about. And as a side note, this game has a lot of pop-ups for everything you complete and everything you do. There's a lot of pop-ups because there's also a lot of menus. This game has so many menus, I probably spent 2 hours just being lost in the menus, as it hides all the things it wants you to pay for and the progression systems and all the different activities you could do for the progression systems. Everything has a menu. There's more menus in this game than there is like weapons and quests and you name it, there's more menus than that. The grindiness of this game is not just the core gameplay loop, but it's also the game's way of getting you to spend money due to those weird mobile aspects and all the things you could pay for that I mentioned. Just as an example, if you want to do the battle passes for a season, I don't know if the game introduces more yet, but from the 3 that are available to me, we're talking $30 I have to spend just to get the active battle passes, which might change. These are only my first impressions. I don't know this much about the game yet. The subscription on top of that is another $10 that you'd have to pay and keep paying and keep paying. This is way more expensive of a game if you want to play it on par with like what you can get than any subscription-based game would be. Like, if you want to go play World of Warcraft right now, that's way cheaper than playing this game. Way cheaper. It's not even close how much cheaper a normal sub game is to the free-to-play systems in this game. Because on top of that, you got the cash shop, you got the keys. If you want any cosmetics, better get ready to spend $20 on one specific cosmetic. While you're going through this grindy progression, the quest system of the game does allow for progression tracking as well. For example, tracking armor or weapons you want to make. However, you need to do this per gear piece, not say per armor set. So there's 4 pieces in a set. You can go to each individual piece at specifically the crafter and track it, and then it'll go in your quest tracker on the side of the screen, not in your actual quest menu, by the way. So if you wanted to untrack, you have to actually go back to the hub, go to that NPC, go to each individual piece of gear and untrack it from there, which is just a pain in the ass. But because they're tracked individually, you know, that's not even including the weapon, and there's a lantern as well. You could have 5, 6 different pieces per set. It'll only show you what you need per piece and not for everything. However, the progression bits that would actually want you to have the set track if you have the entire armor set equipped. So you just need to track like one thing, well, 3 things, because the lantern, the weapon, and then the armors have slightly different requirements, and then do math. So you track one piece of armor, now you gotta multiply that by 4, and then add what the weapon needs onto that, but not everything, because the weapons don't need all the same materials, and then the lantern needs like all the materials but exponentially more. And so you have to track like so many different things one by one from 3 different NPCs and repeat this over and over again every time you go to somewhere new. Like, holy shit, the quality of life here sucks. There was better tracking of shit like this in games from 14 years ago. I don't know how they fucked this up, but they did. And I know it seems like I'm ranting a lot about the game. I probably am, but I can't, it's so hard to highlight when I'm talking widely about everything, just how fun the actual combat is when you get to it. Specifically, when you get to it with friends is where I find it the most fun. It can be engaging solo, but due to this very grindy, heavily monetized system where, you know, there's so much quality of life lacking and you're going to spend so much time lost in menus with so many different bindings, this game is very solo unfriendly unless you just really like doing the most like intensely, like, I don't know, like minutia, you know? Drudgerous stuff. If you like that, which I won't write that off because I've seen someone like that, then you might like this solo. But I think if you try to play this solo, you'll burn out of it pretty quickly. But with friends, again, this is such a fun game. And there's a lot of things I haven't even touched upon, for example, about how the high-end progression of this game is literally just like Call of Duty prestiging, where you reset your weapon back to 0. And if you do this 5 times with every single weapon in the game, you will get permanent buffs that will then apply to you all the time. Repetition is baked into this game, dude. But at the very least, it's pretty accessible. You should hopefully be able to find friends to play with pretty easily because of that crossplay. And the game is kind of designed with all these different control schemes in mind at the very beginning. But I find that it mostly takes like the worst of everything, right? The menus suck because they have to work on a controller. The controls work generally fine on PC, but this leads to a bunch of things where buttons will overlap on the controller, and then it's harder to do certain things on these different controller schemes. So the accessibility is there, maybe just a little problematic, and that's probably the best way to summarize how I feel about this game. The fun gameplay is there, it just has a lot of problems it's dragging behind it, you know? I hope this first impressions has been helpful to you. I hope my experience with this game has given you an idea on if this game is worth playing either by yourself, with some friends, or not at all. For now though, thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope to see you on the next one.